Hey there, and welcome to the Dog Sports Decoded podcast. My name is Megan Ritchie, and I am the host. I was scrolling through Facebook the other day and saw a question come up about slow feeders for dogs. So I thought I would do a podcast today all about slow feeders. So the first question is obviously, what is a slow feeder? So this is one I have, but basically, this is by Outward Hound. I think they're called fun feeders. But basically, it is just a bowl substitute that is harder for your dog to gobble the food down, so it slows down their eating. So that's all it is. Basically, they come often with different designs and things like that, but it's just a bowl that you can see. It's got the indentations. So how it works is instead of your dog just kind of just gobbling the food up the way they normally would from their bowl, they kind of have to push the kibble around through all the little grooves, lick it, and kind of use their brain to push it around so that they can eat it instead of just, taking big gulps. So that's what they are, and the whole idea is just to slow down their eating. So then the next question would be, when would you use one, or what are they best for? So in my opinion, I would use a slow feeder like that if you feed wet food, canned food, raw, homemade, or if you mix your dog's kibble with water or pumpkin or something like that. So anytime you have any sort of wet mixture you're feeding your dog, that's when I would go to a slow feeder like this. I also would consider it if you're mixing in medication or supplements, something like that, that you need to be sure that your dog is eating. So what I do, so I actually don't use a slow feeder with my dogs. I feed them in a Kong typically, but I do have some medications and things like that I have to give Tess, some supplementation. So I find, say for breakfast, I'll feed half of their meal in a regular bowl, and then half of their meal they get in a Kong when I go to work. That way they get sort of the enrichment from the Kong, but I'm also making sure that they eat Tess gets her pills, and they're getting in any other supplementation that I want to be sure that they're eating, and not just spitting out or leaving in the Kong and not actually taking in the medication that they need. So that's when I would consider a slow feeder like that. When would you not want to use a slow feeder? And what might be jumping on you, I haven't really mentioned, is dry food. So kibble, which are primarily kibble. Which most people, I think something like 70% of people feed kibble. So I actually wouldn't use a slow feeder with kibble. That wouldn't be my first go-to. If you go to YouTube, you can probably see why. There's you can just Google something like slow feeding fails, and you'll see why. But often a lot of dogs will get kind of frustrated with these, and they've learned to just pick them up and flip them, so then they've just dumped their kibble all over the ground. So that still slows them down, so mission accomplished if that's your goal. But that's one reason. If you have dry food, I think there's some better options out there for you, so I wouldn't recommend the slow feeder. Again, unless you're mixing in medication or something like that you need to be sure that they're eating. So if you do feed kibble or dry food, dehydrated, freeze-dried, something like that, I would use either something like a Kong wobbler, some sort of interactive feeder, a feeding ball, something like that. I don't know why, but dogs don't tend to get as frustrated with some of these interactive feeders. I think it's a bit more of a fun brain game for them. You can see them trying to figure out how to get the food out, and they're dropping, they'll pick up the ball. If it's a ball, pick it up, drop it, kind of bat it around. So it's a lot more interactive, and they don't seem to get as frustrated with it. Which is why if you go YouTube those videos, you'll see the dogs picking it up and dumping it because they're just frustrated that it's taking longer, where I don't see that with the interactive feeders like this Kong wobbler. Alternatively, as I mentioned, you could use a Kong. So if you stuff a Kong for them, it's going to take a lot longer for them to empty the Kong or an interactive feeder than it is a slow feeding bowl. So again, just trying to stretch out how long it takes your dog to eat if they have health concerns that they're eating too fast, or there's other reasons we'll get to in a minute. But that's a really good reason why if you feed dry food, you might want to consider one of these other options. So like I said, a Kong type toy, a stuffing toy, or a interactive feeder, I think are a little bit better. If you feed kibble, there's a ton of options that you can go to. We carry a few at my store, High Drive, but your local pet store, wherever you decide to go buy them, there's just a ton of different options for different purposes, but pretty much any of them will slow down your dog's eating much more than a slow feeder. So that's a nice thing if you feed kibble. The manufacturers have come out with just a ton of options, so there's a lot available to you that will help you slow down your dog's eating. But like I said, if you feed canned food, things like that, you can use a Kong, so I would use a Kong. But again, if you have medication or something like that that you need to feed, then a slow feeder can be a good alternative. So when else should you not use a slow feeder? So the good news, if you use dry food or kibble, there is another option that you can use. So I'm going to flip over here, and one that we really like is these Snuffle mats. So this is another alternative. This Snuffles and Tugs is a company we really like, but it's another alternative that you can use to the slow feeder. Again, I don't see dogs getting as frustrated with these, and it doesn't, if they flip it or do something like that, the food still kind of stays intact within this Snuffle mat. So what this is kind of typically a plastic mat underneath, kind of at the bottom, that you put against the floor, I'll say, and then there is polar fleece typically tied to that mat. At varying lengths. You can see different colors here, and the idea is you're just going to kind of sprinkle the kibble on top or throughout the polar fleece, and then the dog has to kind of flip each little piece of fabric over to try to find the kibble within the mat. So this is a really big de-stressor for them, which is nice if you have a dog that tends to get stressed. There's a lot of benefits to using these Snuffle mats, as well as obviously slowing them down to eat. Another alternative I wanted to show you was this licky mat. Again, there's a bunch of different companies that carry these and different varieties, but a similar idea. So this would work really well with peanut butter or canned food, raw food, something like that. Again, this isn't so much, this part you may not use as much as a slow feeder, but it can work really well for things like grooming. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but I want to show you those two options. So again, just these Snuffle mats, if you feed kibble or dried food, are a fantastic option. So what kind of dogs can benefit from a slow feeder? I would say all dogs can benefit. Within the human world, I think there's been a lot of literature about how us slowing down our eating can help, and I think, you know, just by association, that's likely true for our dogs as well. They tend to get very excited for dinner time and eat very, very quickly, so I think they certainly can benefit from slowing down, and I think the mental stimulation from maybe not so much the slow feeder, though it will provide some of that benefit, but some of the other toys I've talked about today, the interactive feeding toy like the wobbler, the Kong, or the Snuffle mat, I think really exercises their brain a little bit. So that can be really a great option for any dog, but especially like our senior dogs or dogs that aren't getting out as much. Maybe they've been injured, you know, just coming back from surgery, or they've had, you know, a neuter or a spay surgery. If they're not able to get out into their regular exercise or physically get tired, some of these interactive feeders, slow feeders, can keep them mentally enriched. And, you know, I think a lot of us, maybe with COVID, have gone a little stir crazy being at home 8 hours a day, and that's what our dogs are going through, you know, every day. So giving them a little bit of mental enrichment can be super beneficial to any dog, but especially a dog that is not out getting kind of that regular physical exercise. They can get a lot of benefit from the mental exercise that some of these slow feeders and interactive feeders give them. So it's good for any dog that has a tendency to kind of get bored when left at home alone or anxious, and our seniors as well. So as I mentioned, there's also some alternative uses for it. So you could use the slow feeder, the Snuffle mat, or that licky mat that I just showed. Here, I'll bring that up on the screen. So again, these licky mats, something like this, are really good for grooming, actually. So I don't know if you saw it, but there was sort of a viral video going around Facebook where somebody had put, I think it was saran wrap wrapped around their head and then stuck some peanut butter on their forehead, and then the dog, I don't think they were doing nails, and they were doing some grooming, and the dog was licking, you know, the peanut butter off their head. So the idea was, it was a really cute video, but the idea was, you know, if your dog doesn't like getting their nails done, you could have them, lick the peanut butter while you do it. So the licky mat is maybe a better option for that. If your dog's not comfortable with certain grooming things, putting their teeth right by your forehead and face might not be the best idea, but the same idea will work with these licky mats or a snuffle mat or the slow feeder. So if you feed raw, you can't feed kibble, something like that. Or again, for the grooming, I think they used peanut butter. But if you put something like that on a licky mat or in a slow feeder, especially if you're doing it by yourself, it can make the process much easier. So I know I had this issue. I was home alone and had just come back from a hike with Riggs, and he had burrs all over his coat. So he was still pretty puppyish. Obviously was not a fan of me pulling burrs out of his coat. So I did exactly that. I think I put a little bit of his regular wet food in here, put it on the floor, and then he happily kind of munched away and tried to lick all the food out while I picked burrs out of his coat. So it was a much easier, less stressful way for him to deal with that. So it works really well. If you've got a young puppy you're trying to introduce to getting their nails done or doing some grooming work or body part handling, especially if you're working by yourself, a slow feeder or a licky mat like this one can definitely make that easier. So I know they have one here. I think I've seen ads for this one where they have like a suction cup and then they can attach it to a wall. So if you're giving a bath, you could do something like that, put it on the bathroom shower wall, and then put some peanut butter on there. And so as you give your dog a bath for the first time or first few times, they can busily lick up some peanut butter or canned food or something like that off of the mat. So those are some other alternatives for a slow feeder. Like I said, when I had that burr issue with Riggs, I just used the regular slow feeder, but you certainly can do something like that, and it can make some of those handling exercises a little bit easier and less stressful on both of you. You also can use it for vet visits. I've heard, if I was feeding dry food, I would probably recommend a snuffle mat or something like that instead. You could also use a Kong or the slow feeder. So to bring something like that to the vet's office, if your dog gets kind of stressed out being there, if you can bring something like that in, with a little bit of canned food or peanut butter smeared in the Kong, and just have them focus on, you sit down in your chair while you wait for your turn, and you can just have your dog focus on, getting some peanut butter or something like that. As long as it's not going to make them sick or give them diarrhea because they're stressed out, that can be a good way to kind of distract them and make that vet experience a little bit more positive for them. So can you use a slow feeder for a puppy? Yes, absolutely. You can use it for any dog. So another question I saw about this was, how often should you use a slow feeder? And in my opinion, I would say as often as possible. If you're currently using a bowl, a slow feeder is definitely a better option. It's going to slow down their eating. It's also going to provide some of that mental enrichment. So the more often you can use it, the better if you're just using a regular bowl. But sort of my hierarchy, if I had to choose, if I could feed in a Kong, that would be my first choice. That's going to give the most mental enrichment because it's going to be the hardest for them to get the food out. From there, I would go to an interactive feeder. So that could be like a tricky treat ball, the Kong wobbler, squirrel dude, something like that, but something where they're going to have to still kind of work to get the food out. Then I would go to a snuffle mat. So again, that's going to be only applicable to kind of dry food or treats, but a snuffle mat is going to provide a lot more mental enrichment, and then the slow feeder. So that's kind of how I rank them. Kong would be number 1, number 2 would be an interactive feeding toy, number 3 would be a snuffle mat, and then number 4 would be a slow feeder. So if you're looking to buy one, that's kind of the order I would recommend you go in, preference wise, but the slow feeder does have its place, like I said, with medications, wet food. If you're feeding wet food, your only choice is pretty much a Kong or a slow feeder. So, there's a benefit in place for each of those. So I know we all want to spend money on toys that our dog will like and that we can get benefit of. There's nothing more frustrating than going and putting out $20 or $30 for, some new gizmo and your dog doesn't like it. So I don't blame you if that's what you're sitting here thinking, like, oh, I don't know if my dog will like it, but I actually did an interview with Carly Ainsley of For Dogs Sake YYC last year, and she went through actually a really long video series walking through all of your kind of interactive feeder options. So if you have the time, definitely check out the whole video. There's a ton of great information that she gave you. But she also gave us 2 really good do-it-yourself options. So I'm going to put the links below for all of those, but definitely check out the do-it-yourself options. They're a really great way, kind of inexpensive way to see if your dog will benefit and enjoy playing some of these games. So you can kind of introduce them to the idea, just with regular household items that you're going to have around the house. So definitely check out those videos from Carly. She was kind enough to share her experience with us and some really great do-it-yourself options. So check that out as well. And with that, I think we'll close things off. Oh, I guess there was one more thing I wanted to mention to you, and that was how do you clean these? So if you do get a slow feeder like this, how do you clean it? So if you've done raw food or canned food or something like that, you certainly can hand wash these, but they also do go in the dishwasher, so they are dishwasher safe, which is nice. My only pet peeve with these is there's kind of no backing on here, so you will get water built up if you throw it in the dishwasher, which I do because I'm lazy. But you just, unfortunately, you're just gonna get a bunch of water back there, so you'll have to kind of dump it out. But they are dishwasher safe, easy to clean. You can, of course, hand wash them, but they're just a great toy to kind of have in your arsenal. So with that, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. I hope that gives you some ideas of ways that you can add some mental enrichment to your dog's life, as well as, slow down their eating and, help prevent bloat and some of those things if that's an issue for you. As I said, also a really great by yourself aid to grooming and bathing and things like that. So I hope you got some value out of this, and I will see you next week.